Understanding Poverty, A Battle to Preserve Human Dignity by Juliana and Sally. What is poverty? Well, many might say it is the lack of money and basic necessities. You might picture people suffering from homelessness, hunger, not being able to eat properly, and that poverty is truly just based off of what a person has. Poverty to us is deeper than fiscal matters and material possessions. It is a deprivation of capability that prohibits one from being mentally, physically, and emotionally well. Poverty can strip one of their dignity and make them feel isolated and inhuman. Before we dive into how others and ourselves will measure poverty, we want to touch on a personal recollection of someone who grew up impoverished. Dorothy Allison is an American writer who struggled growing up with social and class stratification. Dorothy Allison wrote a compelling article called A Question of Class, recalling her childhood as what she referred to as the bad kind of poor. She gives us a more realistic approach to what being impoverished is, and as two people who have not had experience living below the poverty line, provided insight for our definition of poverty. It's important to consider the point of view of those affected, and not just data sets, although we realize those are much easier to measure. This does not take away from the fact that when measuring poverty, we should take into account how dignified, connected, and mentally good people feel. In her article, she talks about the politics of they. She describes this as why human beings fear and stigmatize the different, while secretly dreading that they might be one of the different themselves. We see this in the discussion of poverty, as many opt to use things like OPM and SPM, which are less personal and do not take into account mental and emotional well-being. She claims that all the other categories by which we categorize and dismiss each other need to be excavated from the inside. And by taking a look at testimonies like Allison's, we can excavate poverty from the inside instead of picking a level of income that one must fall below for us to consider them impoverished. America abides by the politics of they and is blinded to the true meaning behind poverty itself, just as Rector claims.
Robert Rector is an authority on poverty who works for the Heritage Foundation, focused on welfare policy. Rector claims that America sees poverty as material deprivation and suggests that this perception is bolstered by the media through news stories on poverty that feature homeless families, people living in crumbling shacks, or lines of the downtrodden eating in soup kitchens. Rector shares how the Poverty Pulse poll taken by the Catholic Campaign for Human Development asked the general public, "How would you describe being poor in the U.S.?" The overwhelming majority of responses focused on homelessness, hunger, or not being able to eat properly and not being able to meet basic needs. This response is not very surprising because when you hear 13% of people in poverty, you would also assume that this poverty looks like homelessness and starvation. In reality, impoverished people's living standards are far different from the images of dire deprivation promoted by the media and activists. Many poor households have access to the amenities America says define poverty. According to Rector, this poverty humans see is not as bad as it seems because people have access to amenities, and this misunderstanding of poverty is dangerous because it has the potential to promote a substantial misallocation of limited resources from the government. Now let's take another look at this graph. You might agree with Rector and claim that poverty is grossly exaggerated. Well, did you think to consider how this amenities report may be misleading? The report does not show what condition these amenities are in. It doesn't share the size of the amenities or how old they are. Did you think to consider there might be multiple people in a household living off of just one of these amenities? In Rector's argument, he fails to account for these perspectives. Additionally, there are many other aspects to look at besides someone's need of amenities. In other words, poverty is beyond the fiscal and instrumental values America views it as.
The OPM and SPM are two other tools commonly used to measure poverty. The OPM measures poverty by looking at a family's annual pre-tax income and comparing it to a national poverty threshold that is based on family size and inflation. However, many people soon realize that this measure was flawed because it does not account how non-cash benefits, diverse family structures, and geographic variation all also play a role in an individual's poverty. Thus, the SPM, which is also referred to as Supplemental Poverty Measure, takes into account these factors overlooked by the OPM. It considers non-cash benefits like SNAP, Medicaid, and housing from the government, because these benefits allow for money these families don't have to spend. The SPM also accounts for non-discretionary expenses like tax, work-related transportation, medical bills, and childcare costs. The SPM also sets a new threshold that considers how much people are spending on food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, household composition, such as cohabiting couples, and regional housing cost. These measures are used in combination with each other. Many prefer these measures because it is easy to measure less subjective, more straightforward count of who needs help. But when we are asking who really needs help, there are so many inter-individual differences to consider. Humans are diverse and have very different upbringings, which in turn give them different capabilities of achieving certain outcomes.
The capability approach, as cited by the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, highlights that the freedom to achieve well-being is extremely important, and it tells us that well-being should be measured in someone's capabilities and functionings. Capabilities are a person's opportunities. They have adequate resources to achieve something. These are merely the possibility to achieve, whereas functionings are the achievements themselves. If I have the time, resources, boat, and body of water I need to go fishing, I have the capability to go fishing. If I decide to carry out the plan of going fishing, that is a functioning of mine. I could also choose not to go fishing, even if I very well could, which is what the capability approach highlights. In terms of poverty, it's important to take into account what someone could do and not what someone really does, because we could always think that someone might not have the resources to do something when they are really just choosing not to. The capabilities approach is also good for people who have physical or mental disabilities. If a sick person has just as much money as a healthy person above the poverty line, the sick person would also be considered above the line, even if most of the sick person's money goes to expensive treatments and not things like food, water, shelter, etc.
The MPI is a tool that measures poverty by interlinking individuals' deprivations and categorizing them into indicators of poverty. The indicators that the MPI uses are as follows: health, education, and living standards. To measure health, the MPI looks at child mortality rates and nutrition. To measure education, the MPI looks at school attendance and years of schooling. To measure living standards, the MPI looks at durable housing materials, sanitation, cooking fuel, drinking water, electricity, and assets. Each of these indicators are worth a numerical value and scored on a scale from 0 to 1. According to the MPI, the higher the number, the more help you deserve. Although this tool is very helpful in narrowing down the focus on who needs help, it is important to keep in mind the intentions behind your reasoning for helping a specific person. In other words, you need to ask yourself, what kind of life do you want people to have? Although you might think that answer is simple, such as giving them more food to help with nutrition or more clothes to help with their living standards, addressing poverty is much more complex and advanced. You can technically argue that money alone is not valuable, but the necessities money can provide are helpful because they can give you a somewhat better life. Now, what is the better life people are trying to reach? Or in other words, what aspects can you look at to determine the quality of someone's life? Well, now let's talk about Nussbaum's list.
Nussbaum's list is a great way to measure the aspects that one would use to determine the quality of someone's life. Martha Nussbaum is an American philosopher who digs a little deeper when it comes to measuring poverty. Like the MPI, her approach has multiple categories, and one must fulfill the threshold in all of them in order to be considered not impoverished. These are life, bodily health, bodily integrity, senses, imagination and thought, emotion, practical reason, affiliation, other species, play, and control over one's environment. Nussbaum's approach is unique for its features of things that are more difficult to measure, like emotions, imagination, and affiliation with others. Although no countries officially use her approach, many have similar ideals woven into their poverty indexes.
Keeping all of this in mind, we think the best way to measure poverty in the United States is through a combination of Nussbaum's approach and a version of the MPI. The MPI is easy to measure, which is important when allocating government funds, but Nussbaum's approach takes into account things that can more accurately measure people's quality of life. After we look at the MPI to establish a threshold by looking at a mix of individuals' instrumental and intrinsic values, we will use Nussbaum's list to just look at the intrinsic values that indicate individuals' need for support for a better quality of life.
For a more affluent first world country like the US, Canada, and many countries in Europe, we've created an MPI that's as follows. Under the category of health, we would have nutrition, like how often one is purchasing/able to purchase whole foods, and we have doctor attendance, like how often one goes in for checkups at the physician and dentist. Under education, we have the requirement of earning a high school diploma and having good school attendance. We would measure this as missing 10% or more of the school year, and this is unexcused absences, not for injury or sickness or school-related events. Under living standards, we have leisure time, like how much time you have outside of work or school to relax and spend time doing things you enjoy. We have household and personal hygiene, such as a clean place to cook, sleep, and bathe, and no hoarding or buildup of trash and bacteria. It also means that this person bathes regularly, keeps up with oral hygiene, and washes their clothes regularly. We then have space to comfortably live, meaning there are no more than 2 people to a bed and adequate space for everyone to dine and bathe and relax. We then have self-expression, which goes beyond being able to purchase clothes. It means being able to purchase clothes and accessories and shoes that you like and make you feel confident and comfortable. After that, we have technology, meaning that every adult in the household, or everyone that needs one, has a mobile phone or some sort of mobile device on which they can communicate. They also must have kitchen appliances that work and are up to date. Our last category under living standards is transportation, meaning that everyone in the household has an easy way to get to where they need to go throughout the day, whether that be access to a car or access to, and enough money for, some form of public transportation.
It is important that we do not solely look at the MPI for our approach, and also use Nussbaum's list, which is a form of the capabilities approach. If you were to just look at the factors on the MPI on paper, you would not account for how these factors impact the emotional and mental well-being of individuals. Certain indicators on the MPI may not support the well-being of some people compared to others because every individual is diverse and has different cultural needs. Nussbaum's approach makes this account more universal by serving as a guideline for certain essential freedoms people need to live a minimally decent life. It is also important to understand why we are not combining the MPI with another approach, like the SBM. With our approach, we are trying to get a more well-rounded view of a person's well-being, and using two measures that take a non-personal approach won't account for the emotional factors that indicate the state of a person's life. The MPI and SPM alone don't take account of a person's capabilities that affect what they can achieve. Disabled or unhealthy people could have the same amount of money according to the SBM, but Nussbaum's approach could reveal that they are spending most of their money on hospital bills and not fulfilling what we would consider the requirements to be above the poverty line. However, in order for this approach to work more universally, we would need to consider each country's unique circumstances, economy, standard of living, and culture. This would take a lot of time to do, and additionally, combining two approaches can make it very complicated. It is definitely true other measures are more straightforward and require less time spent, but sometimes in order to solve the problems that really need to be fixed, you need to put in the extra time and thought and remember who you are really trying to help.
In conclusion, there isn't one easy answer to solving poverty. However, if people listen to the needs and stories of those who are impoverished and commit to preserving their dignity to the best of their ability, poverty will become less of an issue in years to come.